Hello to everyone who's arrived a bit early. Good to see some familiar faces. My name is Maddie Kortenaar. I'll be running today's session, and with me we have the lovely Rob Campbell. Rob will be keeping an eye today on the questions and sorting hopefully any sort of technical issues. But welcome everyone. I'm always trying to take it a little bit slowly at the start because people tend to drop in a bit, but we've got quite a full agenda today, and I suggest we just get started. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Maddie Kortenaar. I am the marketing director at a digital platform called the Social Value Engine, as well as a level 1 accredited social value practitioner with Social Value International. Quick overview of what we are going to do today is we have a 60-minute quick introduction to social value at a basic level. This meeting is automatically recorded, so please do not use your camera if you're not confident and comfortable with having your image taken. The recording will be shared with all participants and registered attendees after the webinar, as well as the slides. So, don't feel like you need to take lots of notes. It will all be shared with you afterwards. Important thing to note is that if at any point you have any questions or you just need any clarification, I would like a follow-up chat to please put your questions in comments or in the Q&A, and towards the end there's a little bit of time to go over these. So first of all, I think the reason everyone is here today is because you have an interest in social value, and there are quite a few definitions out there on, what do we actually mean when we talk about social value. But at its base level, it's a way to measure the impact of changes in people's well-being. Social value captures that change and the value of the changes in people's lives. So when we talk about what we actually capture through these, it could be improved mental health, it could be improved feeling of food security, it could be the mental well-being of having access to a green space outside your house, or being able to look out your window and see some trees. And all these things are very valuable, but generally they're not things we capture through classic methods of data capture. We would normally look at things like, how many trees did we plant? But we wouldn't necessarily look at, has the well-being of people improved because we planted these trees, because there's a green space? And the Social Value Act, which is national, publication by national government and a guideline, says it, if we spend £1 on the delivery of services, can we use that same pound to produce a wider benefit to the community and to society? So all of that may seem well and nice, but why do we actually have to measure social value? Like, why do we care? Like, why do we care that people have improved well-being, and why do we feel like we have to measure social value? And I've put this in 3 pillars. And there's probably more reasons, and feel free to pop them in chat at any time where you feel, well, this is why I actually have another reason. But first and foremost, it's about building trust and confidence with your funders, with your users, with your communities, to demonstrate how you use that pound or many pounds, not just to build a service, but to actually improve the well-being of a community. Secondarily, we want to use this information for improving what we're doing. We want to understand what we do works well and where we may want to adjust. There is a tendency in social value to try to make up really big numbers because they sound really good. But at the essence, if we want to understand what is the impact of our activities, we want to have information we can trust, that we can believe in and stand by. And thirdly, I put it in as strategic decision making. It's about spending that pound differently, So we are informed and we understand where our pound or the many pounds have the most impact. And there's something that is occasionally goes wrong, and it's very easy, and I referred to it earlier. It's about our tendency to measure outputs rather than outcomes. We don't ask the so what. We might say, oh well, we delivered a training program for local youth because they find it difficult to find work, or there's a misalignment, and that's really good. But why? What is the outcome of that? It could be that people's family lives improved, that they have increased independence from their situations. It could be that for that training program, it actually improves the feelings of inclusion in society. So we want to focus on these outcomes, not necessarily the outputs. Now that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to measure outputs. I would say they're a very, very essential part of your social value process, but it's going that extra step. What do these outputs actually mean? What is the actual impact of these? And there's only one way of understanding what outcomes actually matter. How do we actually improve people's well-being and feelings of well-being? And that will always be to speak to the people that you're affecting. It needs to ideally start with that. It needs to be at the middle point. It needs to be at the end point, continued point. You cannot decide for others how they're feeling. You cannot decide for others necessarily what outcomes they value. And although you might really know your stakeholders well, I would always recommend to maintain open lines of communication, to be curious, and to care. I mean, that's really obvious maybe for some of you, but occasionally it's a step that people don't take, and then you're measuring what doesn't actually matter to people, and then there's a disconnect between what you're putting resources towards and the intended effect that you think these things will have. Now, you will have seen in today's agenda that we talk about social return on investment, or SROI. You potentially know the term return on investment. It's what do we get for what we spend. If you plant an apple tree, the seed might cost, let's say, £1. If you get 100 apples from it, you might be able to say, okay, well, I got £100 for that. Maybe have some watering and some resource, but that's the literal, I sell the apples. With social return on investment, it's not that strict. It's not finance. It's not accountancy. It's not a bottom line. I sold the apples for this. What we want to understand is that change, that outcome, that change affecting the well-being of people in society. So we might say, okay, so the return on investment of that apple tree was £100. But the fact that people got to garden and be in a community and maybe see this beautiful apple tree outside their window, and maybe they have the satisfaction of making fresh food and using those apples in lovely dishes, and that's what we capture through social return on investment. It's not an exact science. There's this saying among practitioners, which is enough precision for the decision. It should definitely be rooted in data and stakeholder feedback as much as you can. But you're not going to get that. Let's say the changes in people's well-being, they value that as £2,000. Just an example. No one's going to pay that £2,000 to you. That's not how it works. You don't sell it. It's about putting a number on so a common language that we can understand to understand the impact of our actions. And there are a few different frameworks around the world, and they all have their strengths and I suppose weaknesses. I personally go by social return on investment because it's an international standard by Social Value International, and it allows us to compare the relative impact of our initiatives. So I mentioned Social Value International before. And why I did that is because, one, they're a globally recognized movement. They bring practitioners from all over the world together. They work on best practice and understanding what works. But they've also developed these 8 principles. And I would always recommend having a look through the Social Value International website for these, or in the UK, it's the Institute for Social Value. But one should aim at least to follow these 8 principles. And the first one, this is the thing I've mentioned before, is to involve stakeholders. The people that are affected by what you do should be involved in deciding what gets done and how it's affected them. The second rule is to be responsive. If we make discoveries through our research, then we need to act on these. It can't just be a report collecting dust on a virtual cloud somewhere, or virtual dust in a cloud. We want to act on these, and we want to say, okay, well, this is what we found, and this is what we're going to do. We want to verify the result. We want to go back to these stakeholders, and potentially, if we can use independent verification, to make sure that what we measured is indeed true. It's about being transparent, to document what we do, to share with others, to show our assumptions and what we found, our findings. It's about understanding what changes, to identify both the positive and negative outcomes, because although we're often very focused on the positive changes of what we do, imagine a house renovation project, so a gentrification of an area. And we go like, well, look how amazing these houses now are and what a positive community it is. But this, as an unintended consequence, might make it, might drive up the house prices and actually drive people out of this area. We can never just focus on the positive. We have to include the negative as well. It is to value the things that matter. We use financial proxies to look at the relative importance of outcomes. We only include what is material, and that basically means to focus on what is relevant. There's so much we could measure, there's so much we could include, but we need to measure what matters, but we also need to measure what we can measure, because otherwise it's just guesswork, and it will not be verifiable and not as meaningful as we may want it to be. And the 8th principle is called do not overclaim. If you run a mental health clinic and people's mental health improves, it could, maybe it's all you, but possibly it's a combination of initiatives and resources. More likely, and this again you find out by speaking to your stakeholders, if someone has improved mental health, they might rate your mental health clinic as the #1 reason, but the #2 reason might be there's a mental health helpline, or they get support from the NHS. They have a friend they made. These are all reasons that contribute to that a positive outcome. But we have to be realistic in how much of that was us and how much of that was actually other people's work. Now, I know I go on a lot about these principles, and if you're just getting started with social value, they might go way over your head. However, I believe it's important to embed these principles from the start. Whether you're already measuring social value, whether you're just getting started, doesn't matter. It's, if you do it, then, you might as well try and do it right and save yourself a lot of time later on in your journey. Following the principles will enable a level of consistency, especially if you add multiple projects or initiatives. They will allow you to compare better or to understand better what happens. This in turn obviously helps you drive improvement. And again, it's about, adding a level of credibility to your social value reporting. Joost really has a quick sip of water. So we've discussed a lot now about what is social value and what is social return on investment. If at any point you have any questions about this, feel free to pop them in the chat or feel free to send me a message afterwards. Because I realize it's, especially in an introductory workshop like this or introductory webinar, there's a lot of ground to cover and it might seem very abstract. So we want to move from the abstract to the understandable and actionable. So some of you work in public sector, some of you work for for charity, social enterprise. And you'll probably be very familiar with something we call the theory of change, but not everyone. So it's quite integral to social value delivery, I believe, and it's just good practice to implement something that we call impact thinking. So we'll start with the basics. What is a theory of change? So basically, a theory of change is it's a map. It's a map that shows you exactly how what we do leads to the outcomes we intend. It can be used as a planning tool before you even spend any money or any resource. You can use it to map how you're going to affect change. It could enable you to track what you've been doing, and also to make you understand what to track, because I said we don't need to measure everything. We need to measure what matters. We can use it for communicating either internally or externally with others, or just our own team, about why we're doing these things. What are we actually trying to do here, for whom, and what is our intended impact of it? And lastly, we can use it as an evaluation framework. So we might have said at the start of a project or initiative, like, this is the change we want to affect. We may want to go back to that when a project runs or after a project runs and evaluate that. Were our assumptions correct? Is that indeed what happened? And if we've done that in the first instance, it will make that much easier. It happens quite regularly that someone is approached, a practitioner might be approached to say, hey, we ran this project. Can you deliver a social value report on it? And that's not necessarily wrong, but it does mean that data that was collected as part of the project might not be the exact right thing that you wanted to track. And in worst case, you might not have anything to go on and you have to do it retroactively. So what does the theory of change then look like? In essence, and this is actually really similar to what you'll find in the social value engine, should you have a license. We look at inputs, basically our resources. We look at what we're doing, the activities. For instance, it might be that training course, or it might be a concert, or it might be a series of events. But these will be defined in activities. We talk about the output, so the number of participants, how many sessions did we deliver, how many trees did we plant, the very tangible. And then we look at those, the so what, those outcomes I mentioned before. What did that mean, that tree? It meant people have better access to green spaces. People have improved skills. They feel better mentally or physically. There might be cleaner air, for instance. But when we also look at the impact of that, so we don't necessarily want to stop at the outcomes. We want to look at what does that build longer term? What does that enable? Economic growth, or it could be just closer knitted communities. It could be systemic change. It could be a culture of volunteering, or people living healthier lives collectively. Once you start working on a theory of change, it's generally done as a workshop with your stakeholders, with your own team. And it will all make a lot of sense. So the next slide, I'm going to have to apologize for it because I know there's a lot. Oh, and the last thing, actually, I should mention that a theory of change isn't just singular items on a spreadsheet of some sorts. It actually shows the connections between these components. So it shows the cause and effect of these activities to that lasting impact we create. I've got here an example theory change, and again, I do apologize. I know that's a lot of text to read, but and even this is a slightly abridged version. But it shows you a little bit about what it could look like, and I'm sharing these slides afterwards, so you feel free to have a look through these at a more leisurely speed, mind. But it should show the cause and effect of each of these items towards the longer term impact that we want to achieve. In this particular example, We also look at the assumptions we made when we wrote the theory of change, and we look at external factors, the things that are not in our control. And then the other thing I mentioned is impact thinking, because especially those who work in larger organizations, but even as when you work in a smaller organization, generally people work in smaller organizations will be firefighting a lot. There will be strain on resource. There will seem no way of having to do social value. It's just another burden. And in larger organizations, you might want to do it and you might feel quite incentivized and motivated and think, okay, well, let's start measuring this and understanding better and being better accountable. But imagine you're a wee cog in a massive machine of a local authority. Where do you actually start? If you work for a large enterprise and there are so many teams, let's say there are 50 teams just in your office or in your region. Now, where do you even start? And even if you have the support of your director, or maybe you are the director, even then it's, how do you actually start measuring these things? And other than, obviously knowing your stakeholders very well and communicating with them, there's almost this cultural change that we need to work towards. And that is, that I like to think is impact thinking. It's a cultural change in the sense that whenever any team in an organization or any individual in an organization provides a change to what they're doing, either has a new project or they might want to do something differently, to have almost this mental checklist, although I would recommend writing it down as well, about what is the impact of this. And I put some questions here that you might want to include in that quick assessment, such as what change are we trying to achieve and who will experience it? Is that a really big change? Is it minor? What would do if we didn't do it? Is there anything that we're going to do but will actually negatively impact others? How are we going to measure success? And who is actually responsible for measuring or achieving this impact? And how are we going to communicate it? What are the longer term implications? Now that might seem like a lot, but if everyone in an organization is aware of having or wanting to ask these questions, it means that it's a collective responsibility rather than a single soul and a big company or a big local authority or wherever trying to implement social value. Social value is certainly a tool, but it starts with understanding the stakeholder and mostly like what we do, how does it affect others? And I put a little side note in there, which you might see, because I do have a worksheet, an impact working. Oh, sorry, it should say impact thinking worksheet. There you go. And if anyone's interested, to just send me a wee email and I'll share that with you. So, realizing that may all seem very, well, like someone is talking at you, and I do apologize, but a lot of information quickly dumped on you. So just sit, let it rest. Okay, like, all right, I sort of get the social value, why we have to do it. I kind of understand the impact thinking and why it matters. So I have a case study here, and this is a development trust in Scotland. And I chose them because I only spoke to them last week, so it's fresh in my memory. But also it's one that I'm personally quite familiar with, as I used to go there quite a lot. So Mayfield and East Houses Community Development Trust is a development trust. They basically had an old bowling alley in the town of Mayfield in Midlothian, and it turned it into a community centre. And Mayfield and Midlothian is quite a poor area, a high level of social housing, high level of crime as well. And they started with nothing. And it cost a lot of work and a lot of time. But initially it was just a field pretty much in a wee cafe that only served maybe toasties and coffee. And it has evolved over the past 5 years to being this really vibrant community center, community area that does way more than just being a garden or a cafe. They have a pantry, they do food bank satellite service, they provide financial advice, they entertain groups of disabled people to come garden, they organize art groups. Well, they do lots of really positive things in the community, and it's made a massive change thanks to the hard work of their members. And what was really interesting was once we started filling this social impact report, thanks to the social value engine, I was always, and even they were always under the impression that they were quite well funded. You know, they got a grant here, they got lottery funding, they got some council funding, you know, and it seemed like on paper, like they were really doing really well. But still, they always felt stretched. They always felt overburdened. There was never enough time to do everything, you know, really hard work. And what we discovered is that actually the volunteers that worked at the development trust, their value, the collective value of their input, outmatched the grants and the funding by quite a large margin. And it made them realize that even if we lose one volunteer, it would have a massive impact on being able to continue these services. And although that seems really obvious, maybe, to see it on paper, to see the value of these volunteers on paper, was quite an eye-opener. So why would a development trust want to measure their social value other than, you know, they want to understand if they're doing a good thing? They may want to use it for additional funding. For instance, they could say, look, this is what we're doing, the social value we're creating, the outcomes we're achieving. And this is the return on social return on investment, which will make their funding applications much stronger. But it will also be for internal understanding of where they have the most impact. So I sat with them and we developed both a social value report in the engine as well as an impact card, which I'll show now. And again, these will be quite small, probably if you're watching a webinar, but the slides after will, you know, you'll be able to zoom in all you like. It's just an example of what it actually looks like. So on the left here, in the slightly prettier colors, we have an impact card. It provides a summary, a high-level summary. We're only zooming in on some of the details that a report in the social value engine would provide. So it will talk a little bit about, you know, what they do and what the social return is, obviously. It will also show like who are our key stakeholders. In this case, was local residents and people with disabilities, as well as volunteers. Alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the top outcomes. And that's what we used for that impact card. So an impact card basically allows them to share that quite nicely in maybe a newsletter or social media or maybe internal communications that we want to use it for. But this is really a summary of a much more extensive report that we have in the social value engine. So on the right here, I have a few little snippets from it, but I will show you it in a little bit more detail. So again, these are screenshots. I'd be more than happy to provide a proper demo of the platform, but this provides a little bit of an insight into how the social return on investment was calculated. So what we have here, and I hope you can read it all right, but on the left we have our outcomes. We talk not about the outputs necessarily, but about the outcomes that we achieve through our activities. And then we have something we call proxy, which is short for approximations of value. And I will tell you a little bit more about that really soon. But it's basically the social value engine has done all this research into the value of activities, of outcomes, and translated these into a big database. Sorry, that simplifies it massively, but we talk about the quantity of the number of people who are affected, who are the stakeholders, And then we have something called deflators. Now, some of you might be familiar with a system called the TOMS in the UK. And one of the differences between social return on investment and the TOMS is that social return on investment, we use something called deflators or impact adjustments. And that, remember what I said earlier about not overclaiming, not saying, oh, it was just us, nothing else improved the mental health of people. It's about setting that attribution or setting the dead weight to acceptable levels. And that will generate a number. So that was that number, well, let's say the first one says participation in gardening activities. Mayfield runs a gardening group. It's got a beautiful garden and greenhouse. 50 people a year would contribute to that. And, you know, we use the approximation of value, this gardening value of gardening as a hobby, to create £30,000 of impact. And remember, no one's going to pay that to Mayfield, but it allows them to compare the relative impact of their activities. In the engine as well, what we do is we've linked to the source of this research. It would always be research by universities or larger charities or government potentially to have verifiable proof. So they've done mass studies into the positive or negative effect of initiatives. And we'd always recommend doing, you know, a deflation or impact adjustment. When you just kind of start with social value, that might seem quite daunting. And in that case, I would say speak to your stakeholders to understand how much of the effect was yours and what other ways have they found to achieve that same effect. Sorry, that's a long sentence. Back to the mental health example, you know, is it just your mental health clinic, or were there other things that that affected their mental health and well-being? Quick sip of water, bear with me. It's the problem when you do a webinar and it's just one person. Much easier when there's others, so you can take a back seat. So if I start going, not being able to say anything anymore, do forgive me. So then there's proxies, there's approximate, because that's really the magic of social value engine. It is saving people a lot of time, let's say that, and adding a level of credibility to the claims they make in a social impact report. If you have the resource, I would say always double check it, verify it with your stakeholders, definitely. But it does, you know, there is research out there that talks about social return on investment of similar initiatives like yours. And the social value engine has spent quite a long time, in fact, over 10 years, I think it's close to 12 years, building this resource database of these values. I have here that there's currently over 850 approximations of social impact value. I'm not entirely sure what the latest number is. But it's there for everyone to search through and to, you know, choose the right ones, and we're always available to add a level of assessment if you like. You know, is this, did I pick the right one? Is this actually correct? And there will be a few red flags we'll be looking for and green flags. As I said before, the sources of these approximations or these proxies tend to be government data, academic studies, independent reports. What we don't want is for somehow for commercial data to leak through. You see this a lot in the food industry, or even if big pharma, you'll have your study that says actually chocolate's really good for you, or actually that medication is not good for you. And it will seem like it's you can trust it as a source, but in fact, it's actually paid for by someone who has a commercial interest in it. We find it quite important that the sources we use are not commercially biased, let's say it that way. And we only use open data as well. We're very big believers in that all data should be open data and nothing should be not accessible if it's for the public good, obviously. Our team regularly updates the approximations of value. We have quite an active user base. I'm very fond of, on each of them actually. We have an advisory board as well as just regular meetings, and people that use the engine might suggest, well, actually, I'm looking for this approximate, I can't find it, or they might say, well, actually, this one isn't quite right anymore. So we have quite a vibrant community of people working in social value that all contribute to this and help us maintain it and make sure it's still accurate. And finally, in some cases, people have done their own research and people might have their own value, and that's great. So we certainly don't want to say like, no, you need to use open data, or sorry, you need to use our database. You can't use your own proxies. We would always encourage people to, where possible, to either create their own proxies for their own use or make their proxies available for wider use if that is relevant. So finally, I will talk a little bit more about the social value engine, because I'm not actually sure how many of you are familiar with them. So the social value engine is a digital platform. It's not free. You have to pay a subscription fee. But for that, you get an accredited platform. And that means that Social Value International has gone through our methods and gone through our reports and given us this certificate to say, yes, this is using the right standards correctly. And the Social Value engine was, how do we say, it materialized, let's say like 12 years ago. I think it is roughly 12 years ago, when East Riding of Yorkshire Council worked with a local consultancy called Rose Regeneration. And they said they were getting European funding, Interreg funding, for those who are familiar. And things were changing, and they needed to prove the value of volunteering. And to get continued funding, how do we prove the value of volunteering? That was the question that was originally posed to Rose Regeneration. So long story short, they developed a spreadsheet, and this would calculate based on accredited sources what is the value of volunteering. And that's not just the economic value, it's the social value, because volunteering isn't just it's not just labor. It's a way to feel that you're doing meaningful work. It's a way to meet other people with similar interests, and it's a way to positively affect the lives of others around us. So to prove that value of volunteering, Rose and East Riding sat down, created a spreadsheet, then added more of these. What's the value of not just volunteering, but there will have been other things like of regeneration or of investment in well, let's say our local cathedral or market square, or organizing an annual market fair thing. So this spreadsheet became quite big, and then it became quite popular because other local authorities started saying, well, actually, we want to have access to that too. Can we please access it? And it grew from a spreadsheet into quite a sophisticated digital platform that was built specifically to not just be for local authorities, but also for those that interact with local authorities, such as the voluntary and social enterprise sector, as well as some private sector organizations that want to do social value the right way. So not as a tick box exercise, not just for procurement, not just because it looks good, because in a shiny glossy paper that we distribute every year. They want to actually incorporate as part of their corporate or the individual culture. Think of that impact thinking I mentioned before. That's the approach they want to take, and the social value engine, helps them with that. That sounds like it's an entity. My colleagues, we help them with that, and we have a digital platform to help as well. A little bit, and you can tell I don't work in sales, but I'll just tell you the little bit. What makes the social value engine different than from some other solutions that might be in a market? And And the first one, well, I've referred to it many times, but we are Social Value International accredited. And that is important because it does add a level of credibility and trust to the impact reports you create. I like to think we're quite ethically driven because I think we are. We believe in doing social value in a meaningful way. Again, not just a glossy papers, not a tick box exercise or check box exercise. And we are properly on hand through free training sessions, through on-hand support, through just being available for answering any questions, but also proactively offering guidance to answer any questions about social value and how to measure social impact. And then we offer full transparency. So there are some solutions out there. You put a number in and it spits a number out and you think, great, that's my headache over, that's my social value done. But you don't actually know how it's calculated. So we don't want to take that black box approach. We are very open about everything we do and how we do it and what sources we use, and use those open data sources that are verified. So it's not just a machine that spits out numbers. It's it's a way to see sources of information and to truly understand how your social return on investment was calculated. And then lastly, I like to think we're cost effective. These are unprecedented times, I think we like to say. Anyway, we although we are a commercial tool and although we're founded by a local, and still, co-owned by a council, we are a commercial organization. However, we quite deliberately price ourselves a bit lower or quite a lot lower than some commercial alternatives. And we have special pricing for like smaller organizations, smaller charities, to make sure it's accessible for a wider group of people. I think what we want to not have, because it would be quite cynical, if, and that's a personal opinion, but I don't feel it's right to commercialize social value, to tie people into using expensive platforms or expensive consultants, just as kind of like this regulatory requirement, and we need to do social value, or we want to apply for a grant, or we need to give out grants in, there's a 10% weighting of social value, so we need to do it. That's not a culture we want to encourage. We won't necessarily want people to commercially benefit other than within the reasonable from social value, which is why we priced ourselves in our hopes at least at a in a way that is still accessible, and also our pricing is always available on our website, so we're not exactly hidden or hidden fees. There we go. So sorry, that concludes my attempt at being salesy. You can see I won't get hired for this role anytime soon. Here's a roundup, and then if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So lots of information today. I do apologize. Slides will be shared. That things way in. Maybe everything you already know of this. In that case, maybe a beginner's workshop was not quite right, and you go to the follow-up one. But as a roundup, there's 3 things you can do to measure your social impact better. And one is to implement impact thinking across teams. Don't make it a single person's responsibility to do social value, and unless if you're a really tiny charity, that's fair. But if you're in a slightly larger organization, embed impact thinking across teams. Whenever especially a larger investment takes place, complete a theory of change. And potentially you do these at both an organization level. So you look at both what's the impact that we're achieving as an organization, as well as a project level. So that zooms in and adds a bit of focus to a specific project. 2, I can't say it enough, is but speak with your stakeholders. Truly understand what outcomes matter to them and collect their stories as well as data. So social value requires data. We can't, it's to get an impact report, you need some sort of data, you need to have some understanding. But what makes data shine is presenting the stories of lived experiences alongside. So speak with your stakeholders, put them front and center, but collect their stories as well, whenever that's possible, as well as obviously social impact data. And the third one is to use a trusted methodology like social return on investment to build a consistent library of social impact. So by measuring social impact in the same way, using the same methodology, you start being able to build a bigger picture, start seeing what works well, what didn't, and that's fine. But it adds that level of consistency to really see organization-wide change. So definitely do that one. And then there's 3 ways that the Socialfy engine can help you. So one is we do a pay-as-you-go package. So you basically get a one-off report, full access to Socialfy engine, nothing's hidden from you or anything. It is time limited though, it's for 90 days. But you can create your social impact report utilizing all the proxies that we have, just the same. Now, if you say, actually, I quite like a little bit more handholding, or, well, handholding sounds very negative, a little bit more support, a little bit more guidance, someone that talks me through things. We have a support service for £500, which then, enables, lets you have guidance from a practitioner, and also you get that free impact card. So if you remember when I showed you Mayfield, we had our full report, but we also had this impact card for quick communications, if you like. And then obviously, if you say, well, actually, I want more reports, not just one, I want to see of all my projects or initiatives or my grants or anything that you'd like to measure the social impact for. And then, unlimited reports you can get for an annual subscription. And that starts for charities at £1,250 a year. So it's not, well, I like to, charities, it's not the best economic times for charities, let's face it, or any other company, but mostly charities are really suffering at the moment. But we believe we've priced it reasonably well because it will make a difference in your grant applications, for one, but also it will make your internal reporting much quicker, so you don't spend so much time doing admin. You can focus on your beneficiaries, and it would enable you to have consistent Socialfy reporting even for your smaller charity. So I'm afraid that's it. Lots of information. I'm always happy to have a chat with anyone. So just send me a wee message. My email address is maddie@socialfyengine.com. Please feel free to, but also you can see my articles on social value in our Knowledge Hub on our website. And also I create a monthly newsletter that you're most welcome to subscribe to. Thank you. Now, Rob, I don't think I can use my throat anymore, but
no, Maddie, that was great. You more than struggled through. Well done. That was really interesting session. There's a couple of questions in, and if you want me to jump in and answer, you just wave at me. But the first one's from Anthony Malloy, and I think you sort of probably have answered it for Anthony, but how easy is it to quantify the financial proxies?
Using the engine, it's really easy. That's a very short answer for a little bit more complicated answer. There's 2 ways. One is you can ask your stakeholders, how do you value it? If you can create your own financial proxies as such, if you like. What's the value of this to you? There's a multitude of ways. You could ask people to say, okay, if your budget is £100, you want to improve your mental health, which of these 5 things would you spend money on and why? You could say, would you cancel your daily coffee, or would you cancel your Netflix subscription in order to, so it's how people value things. That is very laborious. It's brilliant practice. So what the engine does is it's taken that type of research for you, and you just basically fill out your outcome, the stakeholders, and and how much of that was our doing and how much of that was other people's doing, and it will do it for you. So that part is not strenuous at all if you do use the engine.
Good, that's excellent. Thank you very much. You've got a number of people are interested in your impact working sheet, and then there's some questions here at the bottom. This one I think quite an interesting question from Jen Milner. Can I ask, where there are multiple proxies that have a reasonable fit, would you trial using different proxies, and how would you advise choosing, assuming you have data for both?
That's a really good question, Jen, is it? So definitely. So how do we choose that? There's not just one singular answer. One is if you can verify it with your stakeholders, then that's always the best thing to do. Two is you have to be able to measure it somehow. You don't want to measure the completely measurable, although our tagline is valuing the invaluable. If it's a wild guess kind of proxy, then you probably don't want to include it. You can try both, and if one gives you an absolute crazy value, they go like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, and that's a good, indication. There are some proxies that are very closely aligned, but not that many, hopefully. And please do feel to email me in case you have a specific example. As far as now, most, like 95% minimum of the proxies would be quite distinctive. There's a few where we may have used the WellBe, and this goes in a bit of detail, but WellBe data as opposed to a national source of information. So one is stakeholder verification. Two is try it, and if it comes out with a claim that seems ridiculous, by all means. Three is there shouldn't really be too many multiple proxies that mean the same thing. So but that's it basically. Wherever you can verify it, please do.
Okay, that's excellent, Maddie. Now, there's 2 or 3 more coming in, and we just got a few minutes left, so I'm going to be cheeky and answer some of them. So Tanya's asking, is an impact card included in the annual subscription option? It's not at the moment, Tanya, but we are working on it. And what we find is if you go to a sort of graphic designer for a couple £100, they can produce an impact card for you. But having that sort of automated so that you can then paste in your own logos and so forth is something we are working on at the moment, and we hope to have available certainly by the new year, if that's okay. Thanks, Maddie. Who else is a good one? Yes, now, really useful. Yes, so Catherine Campbell. I'm the growth director, so I can answer your question directly. Do you have costs for local authorities? So Maddie talked about a £12.50 for small charities. The sort of starting cost to get access to the local, social value engine for councils is £1,875 plus VAT. And we've got sort of various options beyond that, but a starter for 10, that's the figure. And let's see, I think there's some below this, kind of a working sheet. Yes, so I think I hope I've missed any. Simon Lees is asking, I've got a question about data. Using the case study example for the 50 people gardening giving a 30k impact, what else do you need to collect and input, or is the magic in the proxies? I suppose it's the deflation you need to think about, Maria.
Yes, so I like magic. I like that. I wouldn't say it's magic. It's an algorithm. Sorry to burst the magic bubble, Simon. It basically uses data and translates it to the value. Using these open data sources that we verified that have a value in them, we then translate that to what's the value for an individual. But yes, the algorithm is not just that, it also uses that deflation or the impact adjustment. I have an article on the Knowledge Hub, so I won't go into too much detail, but that, for instance, is indeed, is it just us that enabled people to have the gardening as a hobby? Was it just us, or were there other ways? And in this specific example, I believe we said, well, because I spoke to the manager of that place, and she said that many people in the neighborhood actually did not have gardens at all. That although they got like quite a few people that have their own gardens, and this wasn't necessarily the only reason that they like gardening now, quite a few people in that area, which is quite a poor area, either have like shared gardens that are not just a ton of bins in it, They might live in apartment blocks. Their area doesn't necessarily invite to gardening, and also there is obviously the monetary cost of gardening. It's not necessarily always cheap to buy plants or even seeds, and that's not something that people would have access to. So this was literally the example of I think 50 people starting up gardening, coming in regularly to help the garden flourish, and they actually started developing this as a hobby. And I did deflate it by a little bit. I can't remember the exact number because she knew her stakeholders so well that she represented the stakeholders to say, well, some of them do have a garden and could do gardening and might even have a bit of money to do the gardening. So it's not just us that have given them that hobby. And we try to be quite we try to not, this is a social value term, but not overclaim. We try to be really realistic in saying, well, without us, those 50 people, most of those 50 people at least, would not have had gardening as a hobby because there simply wasn't a way of them for them to do it. And honestly, if you'd go to Mayfield and you'd stand in that garden with the people, you'd understand that it's not just the value of, you know, planting beans. It's giving them that opportunity to see something grow, to work together as a team, to grow their own vegetables, grow sunflowers, and what positive change in their well-being this actually is. Sorry, Simon, that's a very long answer. I'm sorry. So it's not magic, it's an algorithm.
I suppose at the other end of the spectrum, Maddie, and I think you mentioned it in describing, they give some financial advice. And that advice might be to go to the CAB, your Citizens Advice Bureau, and what information to take along with them. And in that case, I suspect you'd deflate, if you had a proxy about helping people with their financial well-being, which I know exists, you'd probably deflate that to a much larger extent because you're not actually helping them, but you're pointing them in the right direction.
That's exactly it, Rob. In fact, the CAB hosts sessions at Mayfield Pavilion, at the garden, if you like. So they use their space to do these sessions for them. But that is deflated massively because as in,
attribution.
you know, yes, the pavilion can't say it's us that does it. No, they just lend some space. They make it more accessible for people that live there or would be coming to the garden anyway, or to the food pantry, or to the various food services they provide for the community.
Good. So that's the end of the questions, and I see we have a couple of minutes left, and there's a few folk just logging off. They've obviously finished, but we'll finish on time. Is there anyone else? I mean, don't feel shy. You don't need to type it in if you'd want to open up your mic and ask a question, or you'd be very welcome. If we've got 2 minutes, we might as well use it. But on the other hand, if there's no other questions, we might as well go and get ourselves a cup of tea. No, I think there's a few more I'll follow up. Thanks very much. That was clear and informative. So, job done, Maggie. Maddie, you've with your sore throat, you've struggled through womanfully. Very well.
Can I ask Kay? Send me, if you don't mind, send me a quick email and I'll show you. So it's maddie@socialvalueengine.com, because that would be you know, I would rather like to show you. Basically, it's yeah. There's more to it than I can say in a minute. Kay, sorry. I hope you can hear me. Yes. All right. Okay. I got a thumbs up. I think it's good. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Please don't feel like you can't reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help.
Yeah. And have all the delegates, Maddie, great job. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye for now.